Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Sidewalk Conversations. We are in season, what is it, Preston? What season are we in? We're in season 3. And each time we make some adjustments in our setup, and I think we are at our best right now. So, and I'm certainly at my best today because I have a wonderful guest. She was with me in season 1. One of my first guests.
Yeah.
So, Jennifer, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for asking me back.
Yes. That's always a good sign when somebody asks you back. It's like, yeah, I guess I didn't suck too bad. So it's good to have you. So I want to jump right in because we have a lot of material to cover today.
Okay,
And
let's do it.
First of all, why don't you give a little background for those who might be joining us who don't know you very well or may not have remembered what you talked about last time, but you were in ministry at a church. We were on the same staff at Shoreline, and you've made some transitions since then. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah. So I was on staff at church for 8 years, the better part of 8 years.
Wow.
And that season sort of came to a very peaceful end. I felt like it was definitely like just a page turning. And it was time to do...
It's nice when it can be that way,
I
right?
know.
It's not always that way.
I felt very peaceful and settled about it. And it wasn't like God was pushing me out, but I just felt like, yeah, the season is coming to an end and there are new things on the horizon. And so I'm really grateful that it went that way.
Yeah.
So, of course, I started my own business a little over a year ago.
Which I think is always kind of a little bit of a risky venture, right? Because it's one thing to go from one job and a secure paycheck to another job and a secure paycheck. But when you do the entrepreneurial thing, it's a whole new thought.
A little less secure, I guess.
What prompted that?
I don't know. And it's funny to hear you say like a risky venture because that was nowhere in my thoughts when I was starting that business.
That it was risky?
That it was risky, yeah. I wasn't feeling
that
sense of riskiness about it at all. I just felt like I felt like everything had just lined up almost as though it were ordained that way. And
almost
as
if.
Almost like that. And I felt like I had the skill set for it and the experience and the knowledge. And, the only thing that was, I guess, maybe a little bit scary was, will anybody hire me?
So what's the work you do?
So I am a virtual executive assistant. So I work completely remotely from home for a variety of clients, primarily just doing executive assistant type things. So, all of those things that go along with that.
Which is not that, maybe this is probably where you had some confidence. You were very administratively occupied at church, so you had events and ministry coordination and that kind of thing. And so there was probably a comfort level that you felt with doing that executive type assisting work, right?
Yes, very much in my comfort zone. It's
Okay.
kind of, and in my background going back even before ministry, that is the kind of work that I did. And so it felt very comfortable and natural to me. And I felt like I had the skill set for it and the experience. So I guess the big risk was, would anybody hire me? And then it happened so fast that people hired me that I was like, wait, what?
I did.
And thank you.
And you've been great. So
I really
enjoy
So
it.
people started hiring me, and that was just almost mind-blowing to me. Like, hey, people will actually trust me to do this for them. And so I've just been so grateful for the clients that I have. And
Awesome.
Yeah. So that was a little over a year ago. It's going great. I love it. I love what I get to do for people. And then the Lord has planted some new thoughts and ideas in my heart, as well as Mike, my husband's heart also. And so those things are sort of in their sort of inception still, where we're kind of putting the pieces together and working them to be sort of fully grown.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, yeah, which I'm very, very excited about that next venture.
Is that ministry related, or is that another business venture?
It will be ministry related. As you know, but probably some people who are listening might not know, our son has been incarcerated for over 8 years now.
Wow.
And was finally approved for parole in June, and will be coming home in probably just under a year.
Thank you, Lord.
I know, finally. And so when we found out that he was approved for parole, which had been a huge answer to prayer, of course, the first thing I started doing, just because this is my nature, is researching to see what resources are out there that we could maybe learn from people who have walked this road before us, families who have had a loved one come home from incarceration, even like ministries that exist out there to support families in that.
Right.
And what we found was literally nothing. There was nothing out there on the family side, where you could really have somebody come alongside you and be like, hey, here's how you need to start preparing your heart and your mind and your household and the siblings and all of these things and grandparents, the whole thing.
Yeah, sure.
And it was sort of startling to us that there was really nothing for us to glean from in that sense. And so in that moment, we just felt like God was like, well, here you are, about to walk through this process, so write it all down, and you be the resource for people who come behind you. So
good for you.
Yeah.
And I can so identify with that, because I've felt a very similar kind of prompting related to the cancer journey, same kind of deal, where
right.
you have the sense that part of how God redeems the suffering is by putting you in a place where you can be of help to others.
Exactly. And one of the verses God gave to me early on in this journey with our son is the verse about, the God of all comfort, comforting you so that you may comfort others with the same comfort you've been given.
Right. Keep coming back to that too.
Yes. And at first I really I hate to say this, but I kind of hated that verse, because I was like, I don't care how this is going to be used. But now I get it.
Yeah.
And I do think that, God has appointed this season in our life for this purpose. And he's been very intentional and direct about what it should look like and how we should spend our efforts on it. And so we're in the process of writing a book.
Wow.
And starting a nonprofit. And
good for you.
Yeah. So that's kind of ministry-wise, that's sort of what's next for us. Of course, Celebrate Recovery still exists.
You're still active in that, yeah.
And that, I think, will always be a home for me.
Yeah.
And a place where I feel safe and connected. And so I'm super grateful for that too.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, going back to the business venture, we're going to come back to ministry too, but before we get too far off that topic. So you've made this transition to virtual executive assisting. And I'm just curious, what have you enjoyed most about that transition? Because I'm sure there are things about ministry that you miss, and church life and staff and stuff like that. So maybe we'll get to that later. But in terms of the best part of this transition, what have you enjoyed most about making it?
The thing that I love the most about what I'm doing now is the ability to invest in other people's dreams and visions. And even for some of my clients to be able to sit down and vision cast with them and be like, hey, how do you want to grow, your organization or your ministry over the next 6, 8 months, 12 months? And, what would that look like for us to partner together in that? And just getting to hear people's dreams about, their own ministries or organizations, and to get to be a small part of seeing those things come to life is so life-giving to me. Just to sort of be in the background and what I do is helpful for sure, but to watch how the whole thing kind of comes together and see dreams come to life has been the greatest thing for me, just to watch that.
Well, and you've been good at that. We've done a couple of those sessions as well, and always appreciated your perspective.
Yeah.
What's the hardest part? What has been difficult?
I think the hardest part, and I don't know, I haven't owned very many businesses, but you're your own boss, and so the only motivation you're getting is yourself.
Right.
And so thankfully I really operate on the planner side of things. And so I'm very regimented in how my days are organized and how I break up tasks throughout a week. But again, I'm the only person who's telling me what has to get done. And so I think occasionally I'm like, I don't really have to, there's nobody here watching. So you have to be your own accountability, and you have to remember that people are still depending on you, even though you're remote, and there are still deadlines and there are still expectations, and, you always want to honor what your promise is and all of those things, but the only person holding you to that is yourself. Yeah. So for me, it works. I don't know if it would work for everyone. And there are days when I'm like, yeah, this is tough today. I'd really rather just, hang out and read maybe. I don't know.
So if you were giving advice to somebody who's maybe similarly oriented to, hey, I think I'm in a season where I'm ready to do something on my own and try something. Is there any advice you would give about that?
I mean, I think there are so many factors behind it, like I don't know what everybody's financial position is. And I think in some sense, I was a little bit privileged in that I have Mike, who carries the biggest part of our financial burden as a family, and really provides for us. And I'm super, super grateful for that. But I also feel like when all the pieces feel like they're coming together in that moment and you're having sort of that risky, would anybody ever hire me? Moment, that the only way to know is to do, to take the risk, put yourself out there, let people know what you're interested in doing. And by and large, I find that people who are in your community already are just naturally excited for new things that are happening in the lives of their friends. And whether they'll hire you or not, they'll get behind you and they'll champion your cause, and they'll be your advertisers, and so don't underestimate the community that you have around and the power behind that and the ability to launch a business just out of that. I haven't done a significant amount of marketing or website development as far as that goes to get my business going. And I think so much of it happens, naturally through connections that already exist. So
one of the things I saw you do that I thought was really smart was you went from full-time to part-time when you were on staff, and in that part-time role, you started kind of fishing for clients and bringing some people on. So the transition wasn't like, stop here, jump fully in, no life preserver, no nothing.
That was more for my husband than it was for me.
Okay.
But it was helpful. I think that to give yourself permission to do a slow transition, if that's what you need on the financial side of things, that did help us, where I went down to essentially half-time in ministry, and then to be able to build up
half-time pay, you mean?
Yes. Exactly.
Anybody who's been in ministry knows, there's never really part-time work.
Yes. But then to be able to build up the business so that it covered that half-time loss, essentially, pay loss, and then to figure out from there, okay, it's taking this many hours or these many clients, and to give yourself that space to figure it out. You don't have to know the answer to every single question right out of the gate. Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
All right. Now, I know you are very much ministry oriented still.
Yes.
It's just in your blood. And you were talking a little bit about what you're getting started. But I know you still have, you're very active in recovery. You still speak sometimes at sisterhood and things like that. And I'm just curious because I find it such an interesting time to be in the church these days. What's happening with the election, what's happening culturally. And I'm just curious from your perspective, what is it that you're talking to people about these days as you because you're more, you have your stage stuff, but you're very much invested on the one-on-one, the life-on-life type sharing. And I'm curious, is there something that you're talking to people on a regular basis about, a theme maybe?
So I tend not to jump into conflict, honestly. Well, at least I think that I tend not to jump into conflict. I don't know. People might argue that.
Well, you don't have any trouble saying what you feel.
That's true.
Think.
So the political thing isn't an arena that I would necessarily I don't know. Mike loves to have political conversations with his friends, and that's just not my jam.
Yeah.
So I've been spending a lot of time studying this idea of sort of contemplative Christianity and, the way that Jesus lived his life while he was here on earth, and the practices that he himself put in to his own life, like his own habits that he built into his own life to further his his connection to his Father, but also how he sort of maintained his own sanity and wellness, like whole body wellness, physical, mental, emotional wellness. And so I've been spending a lot of time just studying those kinds of practices and integrating them into my life a little tiny bit at a time, because, you just can't jump into anything and get it done in any kind of practical way all at once.
Yeah.
But because that's something that's been so much at the forefront of my mind, that tends to be what I like to talk about a lot right now.
Yeah.
Is ways to sort of bring calm and peace to your life and sort of eliminate the should haves or what am I supposed to be doing or how am I supposed to be feeling, and kind of push all that to the side and just be like, what was Jesus doing in his life?
Yeah.
And how can I just be an imitator of him? How can I let God love me and become a person of love? And so that's kind of...
I love that. It reminds me when I first started thinking about ministry, one of the things that kind of felt like a bedrock principle or practice was that I wanted what I did in ministry to come as an overflow of my own walk with Jesus. And so instead of kind of thinking through the programmatic grid, like, let's see if we can create a program, or let's listen to some other talks and put together a talk that feels, inspired or practical or helpful, to kind of take a step back and say, what is the Lord doing in my own life, and remain on track with that.
Yeah.
And then whatever subjects or teachings or promptings you feel as it relates to your own personal journey, let that become the impetus for ministry.
Yeah.
Is that part of what you're finding as well?
That's often how I operate. And I think a lot of it for me comes out of this deep desire for authenticity in every connection that I have. Mm-hmm. I just have a really hard time faking it. I don't have a poker face. I'm just not that girl. That's just not who I am. And so for me to sort of like conjecture or try to, rally up to something that I'm just either not feeling or experiencing myself is very difficult to then try to communicate to someone else in any kind of meaningful way. I often find that it's much better for me personally if I want to connect with somebody, or if I'm trying to speak in front of a crowd, or that I speak from a perspective of something that I'm either have just lived through or I'm currently experiencing, or something God is currently working with me on. Yeah. And I just feel so much better in that space.
Yeah, and I think it's something we have to keep reminding ourselves about, because like when you're involved in ministry, you don't always have the opportunity to create the perfect place for you to share. Like, oh, I've just gone through this. I mean, right. Sometimes you have to like come up with things, and I would feel so convicted sometimes where I would be talking to somebody about like maybe things they should do or maybe things they should consider. And I'm going home from that conversation and it's like, how about you do that?
Do your diary. Yeah, exactly.
And I can feel, and it's one of the things I so much enjoy about you in terms of how you do ministry, is that I feel like when you can give from a very authentic place, your presence is as powerful as your presentation. So that. when you hear people and you can feel like there's something that Scripture talks about our spirit bearing witness with the Spirit, that's not just something that we experience vertically, it's something we experience horizontally, where somebody's saying something and you feel that what they're saying is so true and so genuine and so authentic. It's like who they are is this powerful affirmation of what they're saying.
Yeah.
And it's so different than somebody who just has like a cute little saying, or, they said it in a memorable way, alliteration or whatever.
Right. I spent a big part of my life sort of faking fine, especially my adult life, just in this space of like, I'm fine, everything's fine, it's all fine.
Yeah.
And, I think that is something that God worked on me super hard with over the last, especially 8 years, where he's like, hey, we're not going to fake fine anymore. It's okay not to be okay, but we're also going to live authentically in front of people and talk about the real. And that is my sweet spot. And I think some people get real uncomfortable talking about things that are very real and raw. I love that. I love that. I have a really hard time talking about anything that's super like fluff or surface. Like, please don't try to talk to me about the weather or those. I'm so uncomfortable. It's almost like opposite of what most people experience where they're like, let's just keep this very surface. I'm like, no, tell me everything that's happening in your life. What are the hard things?
Well, in that spirit, when we were getting ready for this chat, I asked you if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about one of your struggles that you're kind of working through right now regarding anxiety.
Yeah.
And you graciously said, yeah, sure, I'm willing to talk a little bit about that. And so, what is it that you're learning, and what are some of the things that you find helpful in this journey of dealing with anxious thoughts, or when you're getting ready for something, you can sense that anxiety building. We were even talking about your recent flight, and you're like, okay, you got to prepare for that. So talk to us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I had never in my life experienced anxiety until our son went to prison. Honestly, anxiety was something that Mike had sort of had his whole life, and so I had kind of watched him journey through that. And I remember, and I've apologized for this profusely many times, but I remember occasionally telling him, like, just calm down. And he was like, do you think that if I could calm down, I would still not be calm? Like, of course I would. Yeah. But I couldn't really get my brain around it until I had sort of walked a mile in his shoes, which I've been doing now for a while. So anxiety has been, I guess you could call it the current battle in my life, the thing that I'm working through. And a lot of it is just fear of a variety of things. Some of it is just the stage of life that I'm in, and some chemical imbalance happening in my own body, which you just kind of have to take your time and work through that.
Yeah, right.
But some of it is trauma. And so I'm working with a cognitive behavioral therapist to help rewire the neural pathways in my brain that have sort of become incorrectly wired in a negative way.
Yeah.
And it is so beautiful how God created the human body, and especially the mind, to repair if given the opportunity. So I've been really grateful for that experience of being able to rewire my thoughts that way. The things that I think are most helpful are part of that therapy, honestly. Addressing the fear. For a long time, if I was afraid, I would just stay quiet about it, because it almost felt like if I was going to say it out loud, it made it more scary.
Yeah.
Like somehow voicing the fear made it scarier. I kind of compare it to this experience I had several years ago where Mike and the boys and I were at Lake Travis. And we were kind of at a bay, and they got this idea that they wanted to swim from one side of the bay to the other side of the bay. And they're very strong swimmers. But I was like, yeah, it's not that far. It doesn't seem that far. I could totally do that.
Yeah.
So we all got in the water and started to swim across the bay. And I got about halfway before I realized, like, yeah, this is really far. And obviously you can't reach the bottom. It's very deep there,
Yeah,
and so you're just sort of in this moment of, confronting this thought that, like, I'm equally as far from one shore as I am from the other, and I'm very tired. And in that moment, I thought, like, I'm just gonna drown. Like, I will literally just go under the water and drown right here, and nobody's gonna even notice because I'm not gonna say a word. And in that moment, it felt so scary for me to be like, hey, you guys, I'm very tired. I don't know if I'm gonna make it across.
Wow.
And I kept my mouth quiet, and I didn't say anything. And ultimately I got to the other side, but I was crying my eyes out by the time I got to the other side. And Mike and the boys were like, "What's wrong with you?" Because they had no idea what I had been experiencing that whole time. And I was like, I was so scared. I was so tired. And I didn't feel like I could be there. Like, if you would have just said something, we would have helped you across. Why didn't you just say it? But I think that's the lie that we believe, that if we say something out loud, if we tell somebody the really hard thing, that they're going to reject us, or that that's going to make it harder or more difficult, when the reality is that will actually alleviate some of the pressure and some of the fear. So the idea in a lot of the therapy that I'm doing is sort of just to speak the fear out loud, and then talk about, like, what do I need in that moment that I'm feeling afraid? Do I need thoughts of like guardianship, like that God is my protector? Do I need thoughts that God is my comforter? Like, what do I need in those moments? And then just to fill my mind with scriptures that affirm the thing that I need.
Yeah.
That God is my shelter, that I can run to him and be saved, or, any of those kinds of things. I write this all down. And then I reframe the moment that I'm having, where I'm like, am I really in a life-threatening situation? No. And also, God is my shield. He's my protector. He never leaves me. He doesn't forsake me. He'll walk with me through this whole thing, like we were talking about flying. Like, God's going with me on the plane. He's not leaving me as I board the plane and staying in the airport. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not harder for God to care for me because I'm on an airplane than it is when I'm standing on solid ground. Like, God is powerful and able to care for me no matter the situation. And so sort of reframing those thoughts into a way that is encouraging and affirming and gives your brain a positive direction to think about it. And so I've been doing that for 3 months now. And it's a process to heal the neural pathways of your brain, but I can say that they are healing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that I am now, when I have those moments of fear or anxiety, the positive thoughts come before the negative thoughts can take over.
Nice.
And I'm super grateful for that. So that's one thing.
Can I just respond to that?
Sure.
One of the things that I found in working with people over the years, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing, is that people, I think especially in the Christian community, feel some obligation to remain positive. Like, if they are feeling bad, they feel like they have to do their positive confessions, and that the positive confession alone will bring them to a better place.
Yeah.
But one of the things I love that you just said, and I found this to be true so often, is if you can actually begin by naming the fear and what's really going on, because I think that's sometimes half the problem. We're really not sure what's going on. I just feel badly, that's like,
Right.
Or I feel anger, and it's a very generalized feeling. But if we can kind of dig underneath and say, well, what's really going on here, and being able to name it, then I know where I need to go to get the answer for it. Like, I know what it is I'm looking for, and then I can find in Scripture or by the comfort of the Holy Spirit a practice or a principle or an idea that will help to battle with that thing that's not, that, it's kind of gotten messed up in my thinking.
Yeah. I think too, if you find yourself in that place where anxiety or anxious thoughts really have a grip on you, it does help to work with a therapist who can kind of help talk through, like, hey, how did I arrive here? That was I felt like anxiety came upon me suddenly, and I couldn't understand, like, I didn't have anxiety yesterday, now I have it today and it won't go away. Like, explain that to me. How does that happen? But to sit down with somebody who, is trauma informed and can help you sort of pick at the threads a little bit of that and sort of unravel them and understand. For me, understanding brings great comfort.
Yes.
So if I can be like, oh, okay,
yeah,
I understand now where those feelings are coming from, or where that thought came from. And I understand that, I need some healing in that area, and some prayer or just some conversation about that has been super helpful to me, to work with a therapist that is compassionate in that way and has helped me sort of unravel the threads of my own brain and my own life experiences and trauma, especially of, the last few years, and put some concreteness behind the vagueness of anxiety, and also the reassurance that I'm not actually going crazy, but that trauma is real and that it just takes care and time, but it's also it's possible to heal from.
Yes.
And so to have that hopeful voice too has been so good.
That's great.
Yeah. And then there's some, some actual physical things you can do to help activate your parasympathetic nervous system. Pressure points. Cold plunging is actually really good for that.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you doing it now?
I am. I have been cold plunging. Not as
You're
cold as
crazy.
your cold plunging, but yes.
Are you doing it in the bathtub or?
No, I actually bought a little cold plunge pod. It's the kind you have to put ice in.
Oh, yeah.
But it's small enough that you can put 4 or 5 bags of ice and get the water down in the 60s, the low 60s. And so just get in and, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's helpful.
Next thing you know, you're going to be doing 40.
I don't know. It's so cold.
It just feels so good to say it. That's half the reason I do it. I'm really like, but someday I'll be able to say I've done 44, 42.
I don't know. That's not even a goal for me right now. It's like a polar plunge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, off track. Go ahead.
Yeah. Eating right is, that mind-body connection of nourishing your body is good for your mental health.
Yeah.
And it's getting adequate sleep and exercise, all of, I think, things that you've also discovered in your own journey with, cancer healing. All of these things are also good for mental health. And so, these are things that and I think the hardest part is just being intentional and regimented about it, where I know what my body needs in a day, and I just have to make that a priority to give it that so that I can actually heal my brain and move forward from this season.
Good.
So, yeah.
Thank you for risking sharing that, because it's very personal. And
well, I mean, if God doesn't use this for something, I'd be really irritated.
Good.
It can't just be for me.
Good. All right. So anything else that you're learning that you would want to share about, talk about?
Trying to think if there's anything else. I think...
well, while you're thinking,
yes.
One of the things, and you've kind of already touched on it, but I want to draw it back out. We do a newsletter together, so you're one of several contributors to my weekly newsletter called The Healing Chronicle. And if you happen to be interested in receiving it, we can make sure that happens. You can just go to petevanward.com/newsletter and sign up for that. But your role in that newsletter is soul care. And so you're kind of talking about, like, as you're dealing with whatever physical malady you're processing, there's also a obvious spiritual, emotional connection. And that if you want to heal fully, you want to just make sure you're dealing with all of it,
Sure.
And so I'm curious, because they're so good. Every time I read it, I'm like, I hope people read this. So rich. And I do get quite a few comments about it. So thank you for doing that. But where do some of those ideas come from? What is it that you, like, what are you tapping into when you are thinking about writing for that?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's just what I'm living in that exact moment. Like, hey, what did God speak to me today? I do a lot of verse mapping when I'm in scripture. So I'll just take a single verse and I'll just pick it apart and I'll go back to, like, the Hebrew or the Greek. And then I'll meditate on it and I'll ask God to show me what he wants me to take away from that specific verse. And I have this book that I write it all down with, and sometimes I'll even get creative with it and, like, draw and just sort of, like, incorporate the whole mind into that experience. And so sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's, something God showed me in scripture. Sometimes it's something that I myself am really trying to overcome. I think I did one on fear where I was, talking about actual things that I was using in that moment to work through the fear in my own life. There was one where I happened to be with my middle son, who's 20. He's about to turn 29 next week. And I literally just said to him, what should I write about this week? And what was so crazy is he was, like, immediately came up with something. He's like, I think you should write about this. And I was like, that's an amazing idea. And so I just wrote. I am grateful that if I have an idea, I can usually get thoughts down on paper fairly quickly. So I'm grateful for that part where I'm not like, have writer's block. sometimes I just sit in the quiet and I ask the Lord, like, what is it you want to speak this week? You know, I find myself a lot of the time sort of at the end of myself. And that doesn't necessarily scare me. You know, like, God, I don't in and of myself have a whole lot to say that I think is all that valuable. But I know you probably have something that you want to communicate. So if you'll just tell me what that is, I'll be happy to write about it.
I'm going to take an issue with the first part of what you said. I think you always have something very valuable to contribute.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, that's good. That's good. Well, thank you for doing it. And it is. I'm not just saying that because you're here. It really is very good. And love the way you process about your spirituality. And I think it's really helpful for people who are in my position of trying to heal and others in that place too. So
Love that.
Anything else?
I mean, I think the thing that came to my mind when you asked me a few minutes ago is, and I was talking with my parents about this last night, but just this idea that we live in such a noisy, busy world, and alone is a really strange concept. So I think there are people out there that are very, very lonely. So I'm not trying to minimize that experience at all. Right. But I think the tendency for a lot of people is to try to fill that quiet space with anything at all that will get them through the quiet. And something that I'm working on.
You mean like this?
Yes, exactly that. Or the TV, or any number of things. And I think one thing I'm working on in my own life right now is just sort of allowing myself, partly because my husband has been traveling so much, and so I have a lot of alone time at the house, and I tend to fill it with busy, like, housework type things, just to kind of keep my mind and body busy.
Yeah.
But I really hear the Lord saying, like, it's okay to just be still.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know we know the Bible says that, like, be still and know that I am God, but I really think that that's important, to have moments in each day where you really are just still, and you're not trying to fill that quiet, as uncomfortable as it might be, with noise or entertainment or distraction or busyness or whatever. And you just allow, I think the initial first few minutes are very difficult as your brain tries to come out of the space that our world and our culture keeps it in. But after that, I think there's such great potential for just sitting with God and truly knowing and feeling that He is God, that He has things under control, that He is going to carry you through whatever it is you're going through. And even though it feels like it's easier or more comfortable to feel that quiet space with other things, it really is. There's such potential for good in just being in the quiet with God.
Yeah. I just want to, for those who would find that, like, I'm a more extroverted person, so the thought of just sitting by myself feels like torture in some ways. And so one of the things that's kind of helped me get over the hump is to take advantage of natural times when I could do that. In other words, so right now I'm in a 10-minute plunge, right? So just say, I say, Lord, for these 10 minutes to help me get through this experience, I'm not going to listen to music. I'm just going to sit here in the quiet. And if there's something you want to say to me, I want to listen. So it's not just that I'm in a chair doing it. I'm like, I have this practice of 10 minutes in the plunge, and I can use that.
Yeah.
Or to, instead of turning on the radio when you're going somewhere, to actually just say, Lord, I obviously I want to pay attention to the road and do all that, but I'm also just not going to distract myself with something else, whether it's the phone or radio. I want to turn it off.
Yeah.
I also have this breathing exercise. I do the Wim Hof breathing, which is basically like deep breathing and holding your breath for a 10-minute block, doing a series of different kinds of breathing. And then, even then, it's like, okay, Lord, I want to use this time. Like, I'm breathing in, breathing out stress, breathing in the work of the Spirit. I actually say things like that to myself, so that it feels to me like that's a more doable thing than just kind of sitting on a couch with the lights off and
I also use time in the car. Typically that would be like podcast listening time for me. But lately I've just been like, no, I'm just going to obviously pay attention to the road, but I'm just going to allow God to have this time. And if there's something he wants to communicate with me, then that's amazing. If not, I'll just sit in his presence for a little bit.
Yeah.
Being the introvert that I am, I also go sit on my back patio, and I do just because it's closer to nature there, and I always feel closer to God when I'm in nature, just to have those few moments on the back patio where I observe creation.
Yeah.
And, like all of this was put into play by God's own hand. And, when I was feeling fearful of flying, I sat on the back patio and I watched the birds. And I realized, like, God is the inventor of flight, and I have nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
And, like, that thought came to me in a moment of quiet sitting on the back patio. So
Love that.
Yeah. So as an introvert, it's a little bit easier for me. But I also tend to want to distract myself. And so I just try to be really intentional. I think the world is screaming really loud for our attention right now.
Oh, man.
And, they're giving it their all. And we just have to be so mindful that we keep our eyes on Jesus.
And I think that I've had those moments where when I'm intentional about saying, Lord, I'll wait for you to speak. Mm-hmm. If there's a word that comes during that moment, that one word or that one phrase or that one sensation serves me so well oftentimes. Like I think people, I know this was true for me, I think it's generally true. People have this thing of like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and be quiet, and then my mind's going to wander to what we're going to have for dinner tonight, and the rest of the day. And,
so real.
Oh my gosh, I haven't paid that yet,
Yeah.
But, and that's all normal. It just happens.
Of course.
But if you can find yourself saying, and so like, Lord, no, seriously, I'm here.
Yeah.
If you want to say something to me, I am listening.
Yeah.
And then something, not all the time, but something will drop. And it's like, like the thing you talked about with the bird.
Yeah.
Like God created flight. Just that one idea can be so transformative in the moment, and then for the rest of your day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is the payoff. It's like, okay. And I think the enemy obviously knows that, and that's why I think he works so hard to keep us distracted and preoccupied with so many other things, because he knows how the magic of having a good word.
Right, because think of the place he can get us into if we don't hear God's voice.
Yeah.
And we are only hearing other voices.
Culture.
Yeah. It's so important that we have moments where we really just hear God's voice for ourselves.
Amen.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to end.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Jen. If people are interested, like let's say are you still open to having clients come?
Yes, I would like to add a couple more clients.
Okay. So how would people get in touch with you?
So you can email me at jennifer@236.com, and you're probably going to ask me to spell that, and I'm not going to be able to come up with it right here on the fly.
All right. Well, we'll put it in the show notes, and if people want to get in touch with you about that.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from people.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this,
Thanks
thank you all for joining us. It's been great to have you, Preston. Thanks for your good work.
Yeah.
You didn't mess anything up today. We're so proud of you. He never messes up. It's usually right here. All right. Thank you. See you next time.